On May 24th, 2022, a teenager, 18 years old, entered a school in Texas, killed 19 students and 2 teachers, and he wounded 17 other people. Here in New York, gun violence is frightening and is fast becoming an epidemic. Why? And what is being done about this? I'm Sam Taitt. Joining me to discuss this are New York State Assembly member Brian Cunningham and mental health expert Susan Birnestone, who is also a college professor. Welcome to Brooklyn 45. Many residents are concerned, some on edge when they are on buses, on the subway, or in places like stores, shopping malls, restaurants, schools, even churches. Let's begin first with you, State Assembly member Brian Cunningham. What are New York officials doing about this?
Sam, thanks for bringing me on. Good to be back on Brooklyn 45. First of all, let me first talk about what we have done in the state of New York. New York State has been one of the strongest gun laws in the country. But before we left the legislative session, we passed 12 more bills that I think get at strengthening our gun laws to protect and keep our residents safe. Obviously, strengthening our New York State red flag laws to make sure that people who have dangerous backgrounds and mental health conditions do not have easy access to guns. We've also codified making sure that people with body armor, as we've seen in Buffalo, aren't able to use body armor where you had a police officer responding in real time, but this person wore a full body armor from top to bottom. And we've obviously done the most important common sense thing, which was raising the age of the ability for a person to purchase a firearm from 18 to 21. The governor likes to say that if you can't buy a beer, you shouldn't be able to buy a high capacity AR-15. I agree with that. And we've done that a week after both of these shootings responded pretty quickly. We are waiting for the federal government to also do their job, because we know that many of these guns aren't bought or purchased in New York State. They're trafficked through the Iron Pipeline and through the Midwest. So we're looking to get the federal government to act as well.
Let's talk about the mental health question that's being asked very often. What kind of mental health programs are there for children? We're going to come back to the children problem, but for people in general who we've been hearing a lot that people may have a mental health problem. What kind of programs are there available, Dr. Birnestone?
Yeah, hi. So thank you again for raising this issue. And I think it's really important that we all take a look at this, because this is so complex. And, you know, I'm so glad to hear and to know what is being done from the political and legal perspective with the guns. From a mental health perspective, there are many different types of services available. And part of the problem, and this is a complex issue within our society in New York, really in our nation and in the world, is that when we look at some of these shooters, they're actually almost all of them, I would say. I haven't studied all of them, but I want to say the majority. There were signs that something was wrong. And I don't, you know, there's a lot of controversy about what mental illness is, what it isn't. And I don't want to get caught up in that necessarily. What the issue, though, is that when we see things, when people see something, when a child might be looking like they're in need, that child gets flagged and they are brought in for help. These are kids. Some of these shooters are children, they're kids. And we need to get them the help that they need. We are failing them as a system, as a community, as a country. And I say we because, you know, what happens is, well, these people get looked at as evil. I don't take that stance. What they're doing is horrific, and we need to prevent this. However, no one's born saying, when I grow up, I want to be a murderer. I want to be a killer. That's not what's happening. And so one of the things that we really need to do is to pay closer attention. You know, there's a phrase, if you see something, say something. This is so important. And it's got to be done at every single level. And I think we also need to change how we talk about it so that children, everyone can, when they see a kid doing something when they're young that seems a little strange, or they're bullying somebody, or they're killing animals, that also children have a place to bring their concerns about their friends, so that we look at that child as in need and needing help, so that we can provide help, so that we need to change the way we look at those things. I'm going to stop here because I could go on. But
you're a professor, so we understand that.
Sorry, yes.
But listen, politicians talk a lot as well. Brian, how do people bring their concerns to you elected officials?
Yeah, no, and I just want to double back on something the doctor said. Every year, as with our physical bodies, we do an annual checkup. And I think, when we think about mental health, oftentimes folks contextualize it just as doing this thing when we identify a problem. But our mental health is constantly being stretched. I think the pandemic has certainly shown us that we ought to take better care of ourselves. We ought to get this access to therapy, particularly in our schools, pretty early. The last few shootings we've seen have been 18-year-olds who have picking up guns and have shot people. So we definitely have a problem in this country as pertains to how people respond to some of the triggers that are taking place. We certainly can't legislate hate, but we can reduce access to high capacity weapons that help them administer hate on a fast pace. In terms of our offices, one of the things we've been very intentional about is hiring social work interns in our office. Oftentimes what we see with constituents who come in bringing up issues of housing or other things, we oftentimes have them also talk to someone who's a trained therapist or a social worker to kind of listen, because what they're presenting sometimes is not the root cause of some of the things that they're experiencing, but their undertones, as the doctor mentioned, and so we want to have an office that's more responsive. And the state has also invested more money this year in this budget. That was $220 billion in mental health services, particularly for young people. I'm proud of the budget that we passed in terms of some of those things. And certainly there's more we can do alongside mental health professionals like the doctor.
People want to protect their children. What advice do you give to these people, these mothers, these fathers who want to protect their children at a time like this?
Do you mean emotionally, physically? What kind of protection are you talking about, Sam? And I just want to say, Brian, thank you for that, because that is something that we talk about in terms of getting a mental health checkup for everyone, for all of us, that it should be done yearly, if not more. It should be something that we like physical. So Sam, were you talking about, how are you talking about?
Physically and emotionally.
Yeah. Well, if I can, I'll just start with the emotional as well as the physical. The first place that parents have to start is with themselves. And I know that a lot of people say it, and you hear the analogy about on the airplane, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you put your kids. But it is so true. And it's because our children pick up on how we feel. And kids do what we do, they don't do what we say. So when we model for them the way that we are dealing with things, they are going to be doing that more than what we tell them. So it all starts with the adults, and it starts with the parents. Check in with yourself, get your own support, and then you can be there for your children. And the biggest thing is to open up conversations with your children, but also listen. The hardest thing as a parent is to not talk and tell your kid what to do, is to give them the space to be able to express. I'm a parent. This was the hardest thing for me. And I used to talk, I still do. I talk to myself because we want to impart our wisdom, our knowledge. We also want to protect our kids. We don't want them hurting. We don't want them to feel something. And too often we go in and try to rescue our kids. The kids have to feel. We can't protect them from experiencing pain throughout their life. We can be there for them. There's lots of other things we can do. But the biggest things are, one, take care of yourself. Two is to listen first. And when I say this, yes, people go, yes, I listen. No, I've watched it. And too often we want to say to our kids, oh, don't feel that way. No, withhold that, really resist telling your child not to feel a certain way. What you want to do is explore with them how they are feeling. Then we can educate, then we can offer tips, then we can protect in other ways. But the most important thing that I think is the biggest challenge is listening, is really, really listening and letting them talk.
And I couldn't agree with the doctor more in terms of listening, but also changing our language around mental health. I think oftentimes we'll say things like that person is crazy, or we'll use terminology that disparages someone who's experiencing emotions. Also saying that we don't do therapy, right, in certain communities. I think it's important that we change our language on that. Language matters. And also understanding at the baseline of things, a person who is mentally ill is 10 times more likely to be a victim of crime than a perpetrator of crime. And that's a statistic that we're not talking about on television or on the media. Oftentimes an action happens and we immediately pivot and say that that person was mentally ill. Sometimes that person could be hateful and did a hateful action. And I think that is challenging because when people do need help, they're afraid to admit that they're having some mental challenges because they don't want to be labeled as that person. So I think we have to, lean into some of the things the doctor said, but certainly change our language around mental health in this country.
I couldn't agree more. Great point.
Go on, doctor.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And that's absolutely, we need to really challenge how we talk about it. And there is a lot of communities that do not believe in it's in terms of getting help. And we really do need to, and even if we have to use other language, sometimes people are resistant to change language. I say, I don't care what words we use. If you want to say support, if we want to say protection, whatever's, you need a place to just vent. And it's so societal. And this, as you both and you all know, is also the way we define people, especially around boys and men, and what it looks like in terms of being, quote, a man and swallowing your feelings and not getting emotional. And I know there's a lot of people and a lot of effort in lots of communities to help redefine what it means to be that manly, that boy. We, for so long, we've been doing that in our society and our culture, what it means to be a man and a boy, and, swallow your feelings, don't cry. In fact, there's a good book that says, boys need to cry. And I know I'm forgetting the author's name, but he's going around the country teaching boys, and especially in the African-American communities, how to cry and why it's important to cry. And this is something that, again, it's societal change. It's not just in that community, it's in every community. Having the conversations like we're having now.
Okay. Having the conversation like we're having now. Brian, I know you're far away in Albany, but what opportunities do you get for people to listen to you and for you to listen to them? I know that you have a district office here in Brooklyn, but let's talk about how you can relate to the concerns of your constituents.
Well, thankfully, I'm back home in Brooklyn. There's no place like Brooklyn. We are on a recess, so I'm excited about the summer and reconnecting with my constituents and members of my community, my neighbors. But one of the things we do on Fridays is I have face-to-face Fridays. And face-to-face Fridays has changed in terms of the pandemic, but we do set up meetings with constituents who've expressed high priority level cases where we're talking to them for 2 hours on the phone. We do it in shifts. And we have, obviously, again, our constituent affairs director present, as well as a social worker present, so that when we do it on Zoom, we can push people into breakout rooms. We're able to give them the time and space to speak. So the doctor mentioned earlier, sometimes people just want to talk through their problems, and then give them a space where we push them into someone who can help them actually solve some solutions. So that's something we're really pushing. Looking forward to doing that much more. It's been only 2 months in office, but I think certainly a lot of times when you listen to the concerns of people, again, there is a problem they're talking about, which may be their housing issue, but then you understand how that housing issue or that health issue is impacting their mental health. So just giving people space and opportunity to do that along trained professionals. I'm mindful I am not a trained mental health expert, but I do have the power to listen with empathy and to try to respond respectfully.
I want either of you to talk about the impact on kids, on the mass shootings that they read about or that they see on television, and even worse, that they see on social media.
If I could just jump in quick here. I have a nephew who's 10 years old, and the mass shootings is one thing, but there was a shooting on the Q train just recently, and my nephew takes a train. He was afraid to get in the train the following day to go to school. His father had taken him to school. Then the following day, a mass shooting happened in the classroom. He was afraid to go to school. These things are having a deep impact on our young people as they're growing up. Sometimes he's afraid when his parents leave the house. So these things, again, are deeply embedding fear, not only in young people, but in all of us. Sometimes one of my neighbors downstairs mentioned to me that he dropped his kid off at school the other day and he gave him a hug. And it was the day after the Texas shooting, and he called his kid back and gave him a hug even closer. It's not just impacting our young people, it's impacting our very way of life. The fact that we're constantly having to check in with our family and see where they are and see if they're okay. But I think it's lent itself to an opportunity that shows that communication is important, that expressing your feelings to someone, we don't know what tomorrow holds oftentimes. So I think it's given us a deeper sense of sympathy and empathy, and opened up the opportunity for us to have these conversations, as the doctor said, in a thoughtful way where kids understand it, and also how we deal with it as adults as well.
Great. And I really agree with everything you said, Brian. And I want to circle back to something that you also said before regarding your constituents and the issue of housing, because it is so important that we look at all the different needs that we as human beings have. And sometimes before we can even look at the mental health issues or emotional issues, we need to make sure that those basic needs are being met, because this, and it's so important because it also impacts our mental health. So for instance, it's the physical needs, the need for shelter, for housing, for food, for good nutrition, for exercise. Because if we don't do our basics, that is going to have a negative effect. So when you gave those beautiful, unfortunate, but beautiful examples of the children, your nephew, unfortunately, now that's a healthy response. To me, it's unfortunate that he was talked about being afraid, but we want him to be able to talk about that, because it is, he shouldn't be like, okay, good, I want to go back on a train where somebody was just killed. So there is, it's not that he has a mental illness, he's having a healthy response to something. So we want to make sure, is he sleeping? Is he eating? Is he taking care of the other needs? Because that is going to make things worse. Family members, so many of us, if I'm not exercising, I'm not eating well, my anxiety shoots right up. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of those basic needs. And it really, this whole issue with all the violence, for some kids, they live with it day to day. It's in their neighborhoods, and others don't. So we really want to individualize the plan on how we treat each situation, because, when the kids are seeing it on television, so Sam, you had asked, our kids are seeing this in the news, on the media, what do we do with that? How is it affecting it? Well, first of all, sometimes when it's too far, it's not real for them. And so it doesn't have that same meaning. When it's in their own backyard rather, when it's right here and it's real, on the train that they're taking, on the school, it's going to have a different effect. And there's so many levels to this. So we want to look at it. How is it affecting them? We want to manage how much exposure they're actually getting. We want to also focus on what is in their control. We want to focus in on what is in our control.
Yeah. There are polls that say that Americans want gun restrictions. What are the politicians doing about this? And I know, Brian, there's a difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. Address that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's not a difference when you look state to state, right? So I think state legislators all over this country are acting fiercely. I do think that politicians or elected officials are on the federal level or cowering to the NRA and some of their demands. That could be the big money in politics. Oftentimes we don't talk about the fact that many of these people who have special interests are high capacity donors. And that has sometimes blocked up our ability to make things happen. But I want to remind voters that no matter how much money is thrown into a campaign, nobody's greater than the people that sent us to Albany or sent us to City Hall or sent us to Washington, D.C. People have an opportunity this November to respond to Congress's inaction. We cannot get voter fatigued, particularly when we have 10-year-olds being killed in classrooms. Someone needs to take responsibility, and the voters have a responsibility to vote folks out of office who do not follow through with their promises and protect the people that they swore to protect in their oath of office.
I want you to address the gun control laws, and we hear a lot about the red flag law. What is this red flag law?
Red flag laws are very simple. People who have shown a propensity to be dangerous should not purchase firearms. There should be reasonable background checks. I think 73% of the country has agreed on that. We can do something, minimum background checks. There are parts of the country where people do hunt and people do use guns for moderate protection, a handgun. But I think we can all agree that an AR-15 has no place on an American street or in someone's home. So I think we just need to codify across the country, not just in New York State, the fact that dangerous people, not people who are mentally ill, but people who have shown a history of domestic violence, of abuse, of using weapons in a violent manner, should not have access to guns, whether it be a handgun or a high capacity gun. And certainly, most of us are not military personnel and don't need access to a military style handgun in the streets of America.
But a lot of us don't know if people have a mental problem. Let's talk about mental health as a community issue, and Dr. Stone, and the importance of family counseling as well.
Oh, absolutely, Sam. Counseling the whole family is so important. It's the dynamics that go on. It's a system. As a society, we are very individual oriented, but we live in a community, and we're really not independent. We're interdependent. And there's too much, I believe, of a focus on this notion of independence when we don't do anything ourselves. And so there's a lot of interdependence, and treating the entire family or the entire family getting help with issues is just so key, so key. And I just want to also add to Brian, in terms of the red law issue, that it's not, my understanding, it's also not even just for new purchases, but it's also for current gun ownership. So that, and the thing is that most people don't even know that it exists in New York. And I've been actually educating people because it's so important for family members to be able to call and be able to say, this person seems a little unsteady right now. They should not have their firearms. And that is so key. So, I think a lot of it is also educating family members.
And I'll just add to that. I think sometimes the language of government can be complicated. We call it red flag laws, and 98% of people have no idea what that means. I think we should make it very simple. Dangerous people should not have guns. Do you agree or disagree? Up or down vote? This language is very archaic. It doesn't make any sense to the average voter, and it's intentional to have the intentional outcome that it's having across the country.
Yeah. And Sam, when you talked about the family, and I want to go back to also something, Brian, you said that was so key before, in terms of the language, right? You mentioned that the way we talk about mental health issues, the way we talk about a lot, families sometimes aren't aware of the way that they're having an impact on their kids. They mean well. Everybody means well, all parents mean well, that's, but they don't know how to do it. They do the best that they can, but sometimes we all make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are really dangerous. And so the reason why we want to get the families involved is so that we can have them interacting and realizing the way in which that they may be having an impact, and to better overall. Yeah.
Yes. We've got just about 2 minutes left or less. Let's talk about the support that is needed from the family, the village network. And I know both of you have relationships with the village, the people in your communities, people who you are in contact with. How important is that support, and what support is needed?
Great question. I think in terms of the village, I think one of the things that the pandemic gave us an opportunity to do, while many people hated it, was being home more, connecting with our family, the space and opportunity to have conversations. I think we really have to look at what happened during the pandemic and lean into that and stop pulling away from that, spending more time at home, sitting at the dinner table, having these conversations, having time that's different from work to escape.
30 seconds left. Dr. Birnestone, you've got the last word.
Great, thank you. And in addition, technology has allowed us and forced us to communicate with others in different parts. And I think it's so important that we take care of ourselves and the parents go in community and allow our kids to see us being in positive communities and getting support for ourselves so that they know that it's okay to get support for themselves.
10 seconds, Brian. How do politicians see the future? 10 seconds.
We got to close the loopholes. We got to pass red flag laws. And it's even in Florida. Florida even has red flag laws. We got to do better as a country.
State Assembly person Brian Cunningham, and also mental health expert and professor. Good to have you again, Dr. Susan Birnestone. And we want to thank you for being on Brooklyn 45 and addressing the problems that we have here and the fears that we have. Too many guns and too many people using these guns. Again, thank you for being on Brooklyn 45.
Thank
Thank
you,
you for the conversation, Sam. Very important conversation to continue.
We want to thank you for watching this program. We invite you to partner with us there at Brooklyn 45. You can do this in several ways. You can suggest topics. You can suggest issues you want us to provide information about. Please go to our website, www.brooklyn45.com, and become a supporter. We are a 501c3 not-for-profit community television program. So when you support us, our communities benefit as well. And so do you. Tell everyone that you know to watch Brooklyn 45. On behalf of our team, I'm Sam Taitt.
Brooklyn 45 is a 501c3 not-for-profit, and we welcome your support. Check out our website, brooklyn45.com, and feel free to donate or share it with your friends and family. Have any comments or questions? Send them to our Facebook, facebook.com/Brooklyn45TV. If you have any questions or topics you think we should cover next, shoot me an email over at brooklyn45tv@gmail.com. Thank you again for watching.